Imagine a city where you can eat off the sidewalk, where chewing gum is banned, where dropping a cigarette but can cost you more than $500, where the streets are cleaner than most people's kitchens. This isn't a dream. This is Singapore. But here's the thing, Singapore wasn't always this way. 60 years ago, it was a struggling port city plagued by poverty, crime, open sewers, and chaos. So what happened? How does a city of 6 million people, packed into a space barely larger than New York City's 5 boroughs, become the most orderly, organized, and spotless place on Earth? The answer involves one of the most extraordinary experiments in modern governance, a story of fines, fear, pride, culture, and an iron-willed founding father who simply refused to accept disorder. Welcome to Geophen. Today we're asking, why is Singapore so clean and organized? To understand Singapore today, you have to understand where it started. In 1965, Singapore was expelled from the Malaysian Federation, not by choice but by force. Kuan Yew, the nation's first prime minister, famously wept on television. The city-state had no natural resources, no hinterland, no army, and no guarantee it would survive at all. The city was overcrowded, unsanitary, and divided. There were open sewage drains running through the streets. Spitting, littering, and urinating in public were commonplace. Hawkers cooked food on the street in conditions that would horrify modern health inspectors. Kuan Yew looked at this and saw not hopelessness, but raw material.
I was still not convinced that in spite of everything Dr. Goh had told me, because he had been for a few days in discussion with the Malaysian ministers, I did not believe that there was no other way. I believed then that I could still convince the Tunku that there were a number of other ways of reducing communal tensions in Malaysia, such as a looser federation. You know, even at the time when I was just beginning my discussions with him, I found it hard to believe that there was no other way. And I knew from what he said, and he has an intuition about these matters, that we would all be in for big communal trouble if Singapore or if I and my colleagues insisted on going on with Malaysia as it is. I would say that Tunku convinced me when he told me that he could not go on holding the situation much longer, and that he could see real trouble in Malaysia if Singapore continues to be in it. You see, this is a moment of, you know, every time we look back on this moment when we signed this agreement which severed Singapore from Malaysia, it will be a moment of anguish. I mean, for me, it is a moment of anguish because all my life you see, the whole of my adult life I I had believed in Malaysia, in merger and the unity of these two territories. You know, as a people connected by geography, economics, and ties of kinship. Would you mind if we stop for a while?
His solution was radical. Use law, discipline, and education to engineer not just a clean city, but a clean society. And he would start small, literally. The logic was simple but powerful. If you can teach people to stop littering, you can teach them to follow any rule. Cleanliness wasn't just about hygiene. It was a training ground for obedience, civic responsibility, and national pride. Kuan Yew himself once said that the state of a society can be read in the condition of its public toilets. Singapore's public toilets today are often nicer than those in five-star hotels in other countries. Singapore is sometimes jokingly called a fine city, and the joke works on two levels. It is a fine city in the sense that it's excellent, and it is a fine city in the sense that it will absolutely fine you for almost everything. Let's run through some of the numbers. Littering, up to 1,000 Singapore dollars for a first offense, and if you're caught 3 times, you'll be doing community service in a bright orange vest, picking up litter in public. Eating or drinking on the MRT, $500. Spitting in public, $1,000. Not flushing a public toilet, $150. And then there's the famous gum ban. Since 1992, chewing gum has been illegal to sell or import in Singapore. The story goes that Kuan Yew grew furious at the sight of gum stuck to MRT doors, disrupting the trains. His response was to simply ban gum entirely. There are narrow exceptions, nicotine gum for example, but if you want a stick of juicy fruit in Singapore, you're out of luck. But fines alone don't explain Singapore's cleanliness. After all, many cities have littering laws that go largely unenforced. What makes Singapore different is enforcement, systematic, visible, and consistent. Singapore deploys what it calls corrective work orders, forcing repeat litterers to clean the very streets they dirted wearing high-visibility vests in public. The humiliation, authorities believe, is as powerful a deterrent as the fine itself. There are surveillance cameras practically everywhere. Environmental health officers conduct regular inspections of restaurants, hawker stalls, and public spaces. And Singapore's courts take environmental violations seriously. You don't get off with a warning. This is what political scientists call credible commitment. The government doesn't just make rules, it makes you believe the rules will be enforced. And in Singapore, they always are. Laws can stop people from littering, but infrastructure makes it easy not to litter in the first place. Singapore has invested massively in waste management. The country operates one of the most sophisticated waste disposal systems in the world, including 4 waste-to-energy plants that incinerate about 90% of all waste and convert it into electricity. The remaining ash is sent to the Semakau landfill, an offshore island that has become, remarkably, something of a nature reserve. Public bins are placed at consistent, short intervals throughout the city. Hawker centers, Singapore's beloved open-air food courts, are cleaned multiple times a day by dedicated cleaning staff. Each stall holder is responsible for the area immediately around their stall, and regular inspections by the National Environment Agency keep standards high. The MRT, Singapore's mass rapid transit system, is another marvel. With 130 stations and a network spanning over 200 kilometers, it is one of the cleanest, most punctual metro systems on Earth. No food, no drinks, no buskers without permits. Every carriage is cleaned at the end of every service. And it runs on time. Singaporeans have grown so accustomed to punctuality that a 5-minute delay makes the news. Singapore also maintains an extraordinary army of sanitation workers. Over 70,000 cleaners, representing roughly 2% of the workforce, keep the city spotless around the clock. There is no shame in this profession here. They are seen as essential civil servants doing vital work. And unlike many cities, Singapore doesn't let infrastructure degrade. The government follows a philosophy of constant maintenance, repair before it breaks, upgrade before it becomes obsolete. The result is a city that looks, even decades after construction, almost new. But here's the uncomfortable question. Can you build a clean society purely through laws and fines? Or does there come a point where the culture has to internalize it? Singapore's government understood this from the beginning. The Keep Singapore Clean campaign, launched in 1968, just 3 years after independence, was one of the first national campaigns of its kind in the world. It wasn't just about giving out fines. It was about reshaping how Singaporeans thought about their shared spaces. Schools became a front line of civic education. Children were taught, and still are, that public spaces belong to everyone and that everyone is responsible for them. Keeping your surroundings clean is not just the job of cleaners, it is a personal moral obligation. There's also a cultural concept worth understanding here: Kiasu. Kiasu is a Hokkien word meaning roughly afraid to lose. In Singapore, it describes a competitive, status-conscious drive to be better, to come out ahead, to not fall behind. It can be a source of stress, but it also drives Singaporeans to maintain appearances, meet standards, and not be the person caught littering on a surveillance camera. No one in Singapore wants to be the person in the orange vest picking up litter. That social shame is a powerful motivator. Over time, cleanliness became part of Singaporean identity. Being Singaporean meant being organized, disciplined, and proud of your country's reputation. When Singapore regularly tops global rankings as the cleanest, safest, and most livable city in Asia, citizens feel a genuine sense of ownership over that achievement. It's a virtuous cycle. The government sets high standards, enforces them, and builds infrastructure to support them. Citizens internalize those standards, and then they defend those standards because they've made those standards their own. You cannot tell the story of Singapore's cleanliness without spending more time on Kuan Yew. Lee governed Singapore from 1959 to 1990. 3 decades during which he transformed a struggling city-state into one of the wealthiest nations on earth. He was a man of extraordinary intelligence, iron discipline, and, let's be honest, an occasionally authoritarian approach to governance. He believed, and argued openly, that Western-style liberal democracy was not the right model for a developing Asian nation. What Singapore needed, he insisted, was discipline first, freedom later. Or, as he sometimes put it, order before rights. He was deeply influenced by what he had observed in cities around the world. He noted how London, which had been extraordinarily clean in the Victorian era, had grown dirtier as it became more permissive. He studied how broken windows theory, the idea that visible disorder invites more disorder, played out in American cities. And he concluded that Singapore would not make those mistakes. Lee personally oversaw campaigns against littering, spitting, and public urination. He reportedly walked Singapore's streets himself to inspect conditions. He is said to have personally pushed for the gum ban after seeing gum on MRT doors. But here's what's fascinating. Kuan Yew also understood the limits of force. He knew that fines alone wouldn't build a lasting culture. And so, alongside the fines and enforcement, he invested heavily in public housing, education, and national identity, giving Singaporeans something to be proud of and therefore something to protect. By the time Lee passed away in 2015, Singapore had already transcended the need for his iron hand. The culture he helped create had become self-sustaining. Singaporeans didn't need to be forced to keep their country clean. They wanted to. Now, here's where we have to be honest, because no story about Singapore is complete without acknowledging the trade-offs. Singapore's model works. No one seriously disputes that. But it works in part because of a governing philosophy that many in the West would find uncomfortable. Singapore's ruling party, the People's Action Party, has been in power since 1959. Critics have long pointed to restrictions on political opposition, press freedom rankings that place Singapore well below most Western democracies, and a legal system that has been used against dissidents and journalists. The question some political scientists ask is, how much of Singapore's cleanliness is genuine civic pride, and how much is compliance born of a society where dissent has historically been costly? It's a fair question, and the honest answer is probably both, in proportions that are genuinely hard to measure. What we can say is that surveys consistently show Singaporeans reporting high levels of satisfaction with their government and high levels of pride in their country. The model Kuan Yew built has outlasted him, and it has been maintained not by a single strongman, but by a succession of capable technocratic governments that have kept standards extremely high. Singapore also faces very real challenges. Income inequality, despite strong GDP numbers, remains a concern. The city's reliance on migrant workers, who make up a significant portion of its cleaning and construction workforce, raises questions about who the cleanliness is really for, and who bears the invisible cost of maintaining it. These are real tensions. They don't erase what Singapore has achieved, but they are worth naming. So what can the rest of the world take from the Singapore model? The first lesson is perhaps the most obvious. Enforcement matters. Rules without enforcement are suggestions. Singapore took that seriously from day one, and the results speak for themselves. The credibility of the rule of law, the belief that it applies to everyone equally and consistently, is foundational. The second lesson is about infrastructure. Cleanliness doesn't happen by accident. It requires bins, it requires cleaners, it requires waste management systems, and it requires maintenance. You cannot ask people to be clean and then make it difficult for them to dispose of waste responsibly. The third lesson is about culture, and this is the most difficult one to export. Singapore spent decades investing in civic education, national identity, and a sense of shared ownership over public spaces. That investment takes a generation to pay off. There are no shortcuts. Cities around the world, from Bogotá to Kigali to Seoul, have studied Singapore. Kigali, Rwanda's capital, has drawn explicit inspiration from Singapore's model, banning plastic bags and running regular citywide cleanup days. The results have been remarkable. Tokyo, of course, has its own version of this culture. Japanese citizens have long been renowned for treating public spaces with exceptional care. But what these examples share with Singapore is not just rules. They share a fundamental conviction that the condition of a city's streets is a reflection of its character. That disorder is not inevitable. That with the right combination of law, infrastructure, education, and pride, any city can be transformed. Singapore proved it. And in doing so, it offered the world a blueprint, however imperfect, however complicated, however uniquely suited to its own history, for what an organized, clean, and functional city can look like. Singapore is a city that should not exist, and yet it does. A tiny island with no resources, no hinterland, and no margin for error that has built itself in 60 years into one of the most impressive urban civilizations in human history. cleanliness is not accidental. It is the product of a deliberate, sustained, and occasionally ruthless commitment to a vision that said, this small island, this improbable nation will not be second-rate. It will be the best. Whether you admire that vision or find aspects of it troubling, you cannot deny its results. Singapore's streets are clean. Its trains run on time. Its public spaces are maintained with a care that borders on the extraordinary. And its citizens, by and large, are proud of it. That is not nothing. In a world where so many cities are struggling with decay, dysfunction, and distrust, Singapore stands as a reminder that it doesn't have to be this way. Question isn't whether other places can do what Singapore did. Question is whether they want to and whether they're willing to pay the price. Thanks for watching Geophen. If you found this video interesting, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments, what city do you think has the best chance of becoming the next Singapore? We'll see you in the next one.